In the last two Mission Impossible movies, Ethan Hunt, that is Tom Cruise's character, battles the Entity, a rogue AI program. Now, in the films, the Entity learned that by manipulating the news media narrative, it could control every nation on Earth by exploiting their deepest fears. By the way, Kathy and I watched both shows on VidAngel, so any objectionable material, especially blasphemy, was edited out. In my opinion, VidAngel should be in every Christian home that owns a TV. Now, you've heard me say 1,000 times, God is the issue in every issue. So does that include the news media? You bet it does, especially now that elements of the news media have devolved into a narrative media. Now, if you doubt me, stay tuned. I'm going to rock your world. This is Brad Bright. Welcome to the God is Issue podcast, where I show how God is the issue in every issue. Why? Because we can trace all our human problems to our view of God. Now, if you find this podcast helpful, please remember to like and subscribe. And when subscribing, don't forget to click on the bell so you'll be notified whenever I post a new podcast. So, what's the difference between the news media and the narrative media? We all know that most media outlets have agendas. That is, they have narratives that they want to advance. That's just part of being human. That's been the case since as far back as I can remember. Now, when I was 18 years old, I remember we visited the Soviet Union for a few weeks. Our Russian guides, who had great senses of humor, told jokes, but this is one they told that was extremely humorous, and it illustrated this dynamic. They said the U.S. and Soviets held a dual track meet. The U.S. won and the Soviets lost. The next day, the headline in Pravda, which was the government-run newspaper, read, Soviets place second, U.S. second to last. The irony is that in Russian, Pravda means truth. Now, the difference between then and now is that many media outlets have dropped all pretense of being fair. They don't even try to hide their agendas. They're shameless. They fully embraced their new role as the narrative media, even though many of them still call themselves the news media. Now, unlike the Pravda joke, there's nothing humorous about it. Now, here are some examples you may recognize. What one media outlet calls a riot, another calls a peaceful protest. They just change the pictures to show you only what they want you to see. They'll often slip in pictures from 10 years ago without telling you. The New York Post employs the term illegal aliens, while the Washington Post refers to undocumented workers. I've even seen the term recently, undocumented citizens. Now, recently, Fox News aired the president's speech live, while NBC and ABC spiked it. I guess NBC and ABC think most Americans are dumb. Maybe they're right. What do you think? Now, do you remember this picture from the evening news a few years ago? The headlines ran the gamut. Haitian migrants whipped at U.S. border. Border Patrol agents seen holding whip. U.S. border agents chased migrants on horseback. And border agents on horseback falsely accused. Now, all four of those headlines describe the exact same event where mounted Border Patrol agents were trying to block Haitians from entering. The purported whips were actually horses' reins. I could go on for hours. But what's my point? Much of the news media has shamelessly metastasized into the narrative media. All media outlets engage in narrative to one degree or another. Can we agree on that? However, some media outlets have become so narrative-focused that they intentionally twist, omit, or invent facts to advance their narrative. We used to call that propaganda. Now, here's a great example of omitting facts to convey a false narrative. Years ago, I read a headline. President Aquino met with the Vice President of the United States at a military installation. Now, Aquino was president of the Philippines at the time, during a period of civil unrest when many Filipinos wanted all U.S. military bases in the Philippines to shut down. So that headline was a slapdown of Aquino. The article went on to deplore Aquino's unforgivable faux pas. However, as Paul Harvey often said, here's the rest of the story. The military installation was the U.S. Naval Observatory. Do you want to guess what key fact the article left out? The U.S. Naval Observatory is the official residence of the Vice President of the United States, just like the White House is the official residence of the president. In other words, President Aquino met with the U.S. Vice President in his home. Now you know the rest of the story that the article failed to mention. Today, the narrative media specializes in comparable sleight of hand. Sometimes they outright invent facts, like calling out horses' reins whips. But more often, they skew the narrative by simply omitting or spinning a key fact or two. Now, why do media outlets do that? Why do they often value narrative above fact? One reason can be traced back to us, the consumer. Years ago, during the National Day of Prayer, my mom granted an interview to a prominent reporter in Washington, D.C. She finished with these words, "I hope you'll report all the positive things that are happening." The reporter replied, "I wish I could, Mrs. Bright, but people aren't interested in the good things. They want to hear the negative." Folks, media outlets are businesses. They need to make money, so they feed consumers what they want. But I believe the primary reason many media outlets spin narratives rather than simply reporting the news is this: they want to scare you. Why? So they can influence what you think and what you do. Fear is a powerful emotion. It sidelines your intellect. If the media can bypass your intellect by tapping into your deepest fears, then they can get you to believe or do almost anything. The fictional entity in Mission Impossible knew that, and so do those who lust after power. When I was in politics in the 80s, we routinely used fear to motivate people to vote. That's still standard practice. Folks, we need to get over ourselves. We need to admit that we are easily manipulated. That may not feel good, but it's true. Satan manipulated Eve in the garden, and it's been that way ever since. Humans are gullible. It amazes me how many people believe the Holocaust never happened, the moon landing never happened, 9/11 never happened. Some people still believe the earth is flat. If I had time, I could tell you some real off-the-wall true stories. But add fear to that mix, and people will believe just about anything. If I can tap into your deepest fears, I can manipulate you. Whether it's the economy, Iran, immigration, abortion, racism, Christian nationalism, or climate change, the media will often play to your fears in order to manipulate you. Why do they do that? Power, money, fame, you name it. Politicians and the media have always used fear to try to control the masses. Hitler did it. Stalin did it. Oh, Roosevelt did it. However, today's 24-hour news cycle combined with the internet and AI, especially AI, have driven fear-based narratives to a fever pitch. Let me give you an example of the power of AI to connect with you on an emotional level. I ran across this video about a month ago. I'm using it as an example because it feels uplifting, not scary, at least until you know the rest of the story.
There's mud and smoke upon my coat. The truth is stuck inside my throat. I have no holy song to share. Just sit with me and pull a chair. Just sit with me, Lord. Let me feel your presence here. I'm running from the darkness. Brings me fear. I've been losing sleep and fading. If I cannot hold my ground, let me lean upon your shoulder till the morning light is found.
When I first heard Arthur Hayes perform this song, it connected deeply with my soul. However, when I Googled the artist, I was dumbfounded. Here's the first thing you need to know about Arthur Hayes. He will never, never, never come and sing in your church. How do I know that with 100% certainty? Because he's not real. The song was written, orchestrated, and produced by AI. Even Arthur's face and voice were completely AI generated. Honestly, I'm still processing the fact that I was ministered to by a machine. Everything looked and felt so real. It's a brave new world that even Aldous Huxley didn't anticipate. Now, folks, I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on this. I'm still processing it. Does this rock your world as much as it does mine? Let me know in the comments section. Now, that was a more or less positive but disturbing example of what AI can do. Just imagine for a moment how the narrative media might use AI to reshape how you see and experience the world. Think the entity from Mission Impossible, but driven by humans who crave power. It's no longer just an issue of what the narrative media omits or bends. They are now capable of creating complete fiction that looks and feels real. And that's going to start happening more and more. In a world where large segments of the news media have metastasized into narrative media, the narrative itself becomes the filter for determining fact and truth. The next inevitable step will be to move beyond manipulating facts to tasking AI to create facts. It used to take an entire generation to realign a culture. Soon it'll only take a few years or even less. Now, here's the reason why. It's hard to not believe your eyes. It's even harder to discount what you see when those images play to your deepest fears. So, folks, what's the solution? Well, first and foremost, immerse yourself in God's word, in God's narrative. Learn to see the world through God's eyes and God's character. If you know God's truth, you'll be far less likely to fall prey to the world's narrative. And that means you've got to spend a lot more time in God's word. Do you know that they teach bank tellers to spot counterfeit money by having them handle the real currency until they know exactly what it feels like? Likewise, if you saturate your mind with God's narrative, you'll be far less likely to be deceived by man's narrative. Now, second, get your information from multiple sources outside of social media. If you get your information from social media primarily, I could guarantee you've already been manipulated. Now, use multiple sources to increase your odds of gleaning reliable information. Even the best sources can make mistakes, so don't rely on just one source. Now, the most challenging part of being shrewd as a snake, as Jesus commanded, is getting good information. Now, third, wait a few days or even more before forming an opinion on the latest issue. Wait for the critical information to surface. I often hear mush brains spout, their feelings on an issue long before all the pertinent facts are available. They're complete idiots. Tune them out. And please, please, please don't be one of them. Fourth and finally, keep praying for revival. If media personalities and politicians don't feel accountable to God, why would they feel obligated to report facts rather than narrative? God is the issue in every issue. God's narrative is the only narrative that you can stake your future on. I hope you found this podcast helpful. If you did, please remember to share it. This is Brad Bright. Thanks for joining me today. God bless.